Welcome to Right Side of the Brain, the podcast created by Interact Stroke Support. Interact are a charity that take professional actors into hospitals and stroke clubs to deliver a live interactive reading service to stroke survivors. And we now also deliver the service virtually, directly into people's homes. Please visit our website, www.interactstrokesupport.org, for more details. Our guest this week is actor and former Interact reader, Eleanor Caird. Eleanor Caird, a very, very warm welcome to our podcast, Right Side of the Brain.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
No, it is an absolute pleasure, Eleanor. Now, you were at Interact right from, or practically from the very, very beginning, as I recall. Tell us how you got involved with Interact and why you were drawn to the charity.
I actually wasn't from the very beginning. I heard Caroline Smith, who created it, interviewed on Radio 4, and I think it had been going about a year or two. So I looked up the charity and got in touch with her, wrote her a letter and said it was something I'd be really interested in getting involved with. And then I didn't hear anything back straight away, so I forgot about it. And then about 6 months later, she called me and said, "Would you like to come in for an interview?" And I said, "Yes." So that's how it started.
And what were those very early days like, Eleanor? You know, going into the hospitals. What were the sort of the trials and the tribulations of working for a newish charity at that time, delivering a reading service in a hospital setting?
Well, there are all the practical difficulties. You're competing with beeping machines and um, televisions, sometimes noisy visitors or distressed patients, and sometimes emergencies as well. So it's not quite as gentle as sometimes it sounds. You're trying to make a patient feel calm and relaxed in what's quite often a chaotic environment, and they're usually quite scared. I mean, they've just had a stroke, so your job is to really keep them calm, I suppose. But I think some of the difficulties I found as a new reader, one of the things was asphasia. I'd never come across that before. And when you first meet somebody with asphasia, it's very difficult to know how to deal with that. Um, so, and in those days, patients were in hospital for quite a long time. And I remember reading to one man, and I really couldn't understand. Asphasia is when people can't speak properly. So sometimes they'll repeat a sound or something, um, and it's almost impossible to understand what they're trying to say. But this one patient I read to for about 6 months. In those days, they were in that long, and that was fascinating because by the end of that time, he'd managed to regain his speech,
Oh,
and he
wow.
could actually tell me, what had gone on for him. So he was able to tell me that he'd had a stroke in the Philippines, and he'd woken up after a couple of days in a coma, and his sister was there and the doctor, and they were explaining to him what had happened and that he was going to be flown back to London. And then he asked a question, and they both looked horrified, and the sister turned to the doctor, and he just said, "Yeah, this is one of the side effects of stroke." But the patient didn't know what was going on, and so he kept asking questions and not being understood. And he said it was like going to sleep and waking up speaking a foreign language that you think you're speaking like we are now, but everybody around you hears this language that nobody can understand.
I think that's a really fantastic description, actually, and you raise a very, very important point, which is the sometimes chaotic surroundings of a hospital ward and what is going on in a hospital ward. And I think some people can often have the impression that this is a rather genteel thing where, we are reading to a stroke patient, forgetting, of course, the environment that you are in, and also the challenges that you face when someone has something like aphasia. Um,
Yeah.
that's a very interesting anecdote. Do you have any other sort of anecdotes or moving experiences um, that you saw during your time as an Interact reader?
Well, I think any Interact reader would have a store full. I mean, just sitting, being having the privilege of spending time with people and hearing their life stories and hearing about what they've been up to is as interesting as the stories that you're trying to read to them. I think there. I think one of mine would be there was a guy who couldn't speak again, and we read to him for a few weeks, and then I think it was Oliver Senton managed to. He'd read a story that triggered for this guy that a story about somebody with a daughter, so he was able to convey to the reader that he had a daughter and that she was a nurse, and one of the members of staff knew what island this patient had come from, and so managed to find out there were two hospitals on the island. One of them they rang and didn't get anywhere. Then the second one, there was a nurse working there with the same surname, and this man had come over to Britain and then lost touch with his daughter, and she was been worried sick. She didn't know what had happened. So that was brilliant. They managed to make contact, and he was actually an English teacher. So um, she found out that somebody he taught that was now in London, and I think he was to do with the government. Managed to tell him that his old English teacher was at St Thomas's, so he came to visit. And the next time I went to see this patient, he was just surrounded by all these flowers and, looking completely different. And, that was lovely that came out of that. Um, but some patients they weren't so receptive to the service, and there was one patient I was warned about reading to, and they said, please don't read to him because he's really aggressive. He's got a lot of problems. He's homeless and he's just had a stroke. And so I said, yeah, sure. And I went in and read to the person in the bed next to him, because sometimes that was a good way of getting somebody that was reluctant to be read to introduce them to what we were doing. And when I'd finished, I made eye contact with this man, and he shook his head. And I said, "Oh, that's okay. I'm not going to read to you. That's okay." But my dad emailed this joke to me this morning, and I was wondering if I could tell it to you, because I'm not really sure how appropriate it would be for me to use this joke for on the ward for patients. So I told him this filthy joke that my dad had sent me that morning, and he burst out laughing. So then I said to him, "Oh, do you want to hear a story?" And he said, "Yeah, all right, go on." So I read him a story, and then we had a little chat about being in hospital and how boring it can be and stuff like that. And then when I left, the speech therapist was like, "Eleanor, how did you do that? How on earth did you? We can't even give him his medication. That's how reluctant he is to have any kind of intervention or help." And that was the other thing that we could do, was find a way in sometimes with patients, because depression is a massive side effect of having a stroke. And what we tried to do is to transport somebody away from the hospital, away from what's happened to them, give them something else to think about for a little bit, and then when they come back, quite often they will be in a much more receptive place.
Yeah, and that is such a brilliant point about how sometimes, we can go beyond what occupational and speech therapists think about a particular person, connect with them in the way that you did by telling them a joke that had been sent to you by your dad, and suddenly they are making at least some form of engagement and communication with somebody else that isn't necessarily the hostile image that other hospital practitioners may have of that person. And quite often, after an experience like that, they may be more inclined to work with occupational and speech therapists because they themselves are in a little bit of a better place at that point in time.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. But also, I think the advantage we have with that is time. You know, the people that work in hospitals, they don't have enough time to spend with patients, and we had that luxury of being able to sit with people and learn about their families and learn about their lives and learn about them. I think many years ago, I worked in a casino as a croupier, and I witnessed human nature at its worst. You know, people quite possibly the best time of their lives, behaving appallingly. um, and when I started working for Interact, what really struck me was I was meeting people at arguably the worst moment in their lives, and just witnessing such courage and bravery and the best of human nature.
Yeah. You, of course, were with Interact for quite a long time. And so obviously you saw Interact change and evolve over the years, um, in particular with an emphasis on post hospital creative projects. And as I recall, you were one of the yourself and Christine, the late Christine Collins, um, were the sort of the very first people to develop community-based projects where Interact were encouraging stroke survivors to be creative, and essentially you and Christine were acting as facilitators for their creativity. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Wow, that was, I mean, that was quite, we were given a brief. We were asked to do drama workshops with with a stroke club in the Holloway Road. And so we were, the group that were involved were had a big range of disabilities. Some people couldn't speak, some people couldn't move. So we thought, right, well, we've been asked to do a drama workshop. That's what we're going to do. So we started off doing mouth exercises and getting everybody to greet each other in their own languages, because that was the other thing. It was a very mixed group. And then we went on to creating. We got them to do mimes. We'd print out cards with pictures of activities on and get them to mime what, ironing, or it was quite challenging for some people and easy for others. So it was difficult to kind of get that balance right. But what we struck on was, in the middle of all of this, the one thing that we learnt was that a lot of people hadn't actually had that much communication with each other. They'd been kind of wheeled in, left in a corner with a cup of tea, and which was exactly what the carers needed. You know, they needed a break. They needed to go and do some shopping or get their hair done, or just have a cup of coffee. Um, but for the patient, or the stroke survivor, I should say, they were, a bit bored, and the other group sometimes didn't. There was an example where one lady was from the Congo, so we started speaking French to her, and then she started communicating back. And the rest of the group said we didn't even know that she could speak, and then they felt awful because they sort of ignored her. Um, but there were the other sort of occasions that were really powerful for me was that in the middle of all these games that we were playing and things, sometimes people would stop and just tell you about their experience. And there was one man who gave a description of, he really wanted to get home and he thought everything would be fine once he got home. And then got home and, of course, still had a stroke. And he went to the shop to get some milk, and he couldn't find the right change in time, and the queue was building up. And the shopkeeper was quite rude to him and ended up throwing him out because he thought he was drunk. And then somebody else in the group said that that exact thing had happened to them, and it had made them never want to leave the house again. And then one of the ladies in the group said when she had her stroke, she suddenly realized she was surrounded by people, and she thought, great, they're going to help me. Somebody must be calling an ambulance. And then she realized they were having a go at her because they thought she was lying on the pavement drunk, slurring her words. And these were experiences that they had all been through, but had never really shared with anybody, and certainly not with each other. And that was really empowering for them, to realize that their experience wasn't a one-off. It was really common. I mean, I must say this was a good while ago, and I think these commercials like Face and all the knowledge we now have about stroke, I think people are much more aware of the symptoms and spotting the symptoms. But certainly back then, it was, you were quite often accused of being drunk.
That is such a interesting anecdote. I would love to know how many stroke survivors have gone through a perception of other people looking at them and thinking that they are drunk in some way, and not realizing that actually it is a product of the condition that they have,
Yeah.
which is a stroke.
Mm.
And it'd be very interesting if an organization like, for example, the Stroke Association would do more research into that, because that initial perception of, oh, this person is drunk, inevitably leads to, well, I'm not going to necessarily help this
Yeah.
person
Yeah, they're in that state because 'cause they've got them.
because of
Yeah.
themselves. That that they have brought this on themselves, so I'm not going to get involved. And if somebody is having a stroke, if we could get them into the hospitals during what's known as, the golden hours, the earliest that we could get them into the hospitals, they're more likely to be treated as the medical emergency that it is. And within that golden time, hopefully the medical professionals can help them, to maximum effect.
Yeah.
But it does need the general public to not look at people like that and make assumptions that they've just had a stroke, that they're just drunk.
Yeah.
You obviously met a whole load of stroke survivors, both in hospitals, you met them in stroke clubs, you met them doing the community projects that you were just articulating now, Eleanor. Did it change your particular view of stroke?
Um, well, I think one of there were a couple of things that really struck me. The first was how young you can be to have you imagine you're going to be reading to grandparents, and actually you're reading to a very wide age group, and they seemed to get younger. Maybe I just was getting older. um, but the other thing about that I must just mention about reading in hospitals that I wasn't aware of was how many patients don't have any visitors at all. I mean, we tread that line where the doctors are there to test them, and the family are sometimes quite upset. Understandably, at seeing their loved ones having just had a stroke, and we're great at being able to give take everybody away from that situation for a moment and give them something else to talk about. If somebody's visiting every day, they can run out of things to say, and that gave a tremendous freedom, I think, to people. But the amount of patients I read to that didn't have, I was the only visitor they had, was really quite shocking, and I think very typical of today. A lot of people don't live near their families, and if you're in a hospital that's a big distance, um, you might be estranged from your family, but sometimes you're not. They just can't physically get to visit you.
Again, Eleanor, you're raising really, really important points here, because this has always been a concern of mine. This whole concept of loneliness, and I often feel that in many ways, loneliness is not an exclusive monopoly of stroke survivors. That this is a major issue that we face in society in general. And I know that Interact obviously are a stroke-based charity, but I often think to myself, if we could help people who are socially isolated, who are desperately lonely, maybe via projects like Interact at Home, for example, which is the virtual service that we offer at this point in time, that That would be a wonderful thing because loneliness has become such a massive issue over the last 5, 10 years, and of course, it's probably been exacerbated by the lockdowns and COVID.
Yes. Yeah.
You were part of what was originally a two-handed play that Interact created called "It Couldn't Happen to Us," which was essentially the story of a couple and the impact of a stroke on that couple and how it affects or affected their relationship. And the play sort of became a three-hander over time. But it initially performed at various places. Stroke clubs. It performed at a stroke assembly, I think in Nottingham. It performed at the Stroke Forum, which at that time I think was in Liverpool. Um, you were part of that. You performed within that. Could you tell me about your experiences in the play and any feedback that you received uh, about the play?
Well, the thing is, the 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 play was really about a man having a stroke, and we were trying to um, just show how devastating this affects not just the person who's had the stroke, but the people around them. And that was my. I mean, I was playing the partner of the person who'd had the stroke, and that was the main feedback I was getting was that's my story because the people that are left to care. I remember one woman saying to me, I spent 3 months with the doctors telling me, "Oh, the carer will do that. The carer's now got to do that. That's a job for the carer." And it took her 3 months before she realized that meant her. She was the carer. And, it doesn't matter how much you love somebody and how much time you've spent with them, you're not always the best person for that job. And the person who's had the stroke might not want you to be that role. They might need you actually to carry on being the loving partner rather than a carer. Um, and there was a great line actually in the play about, am I supposed to just drop my life and be a carer now? And you could hear a pin drop when I said that sometimes because you knew that the carers, and that's exactly, they hadn't signed up to this. Yeah, so that was the main thing that I remember from it was how many people I could identify with her story. We were really doing it to show what had happened to the stroke survivor, but it was really her story that seemed to that goes unsaid.
That's exactly the same impression that I got too, from that play. That although it,
Because you of course were playing the
I was playing
spirit.
the chap who has the stroke itself,
Yeah,
um, and assumed that that would be the main takeaway. And like you, it was fascinating that the biggest feedback we received was never about the stroke survivor per se, but about the implications to his partner and how her life had suddenly changed and
yeah,
what happens to them. And it raised the wider issue that's always bothered me in a way about carers. We never ever talk about the carers. We never sort of address the issues, the concerns, the fears and anxieties that and the way that their lives have fundamentally changed. And it's always been something that has concerned me. And I wonder in the future whether we as a charity could try to at least explore that in some way.
yeah, yeah.
One thing that you did, Eleanor, whilst you were with Interact, is that you trained new actors. And I think that there will be a lot of people who think, well, I'm a professional actor. I know how to read. What's there to be trained about? And I wonder how you'd answer that.
Well, I think to be fair, I think an awful lot of actors already have all the skills needed to do this because, like I said at the start, you're competing against a lot of a lot of distractions when you're reading to a patient on a very busy ward, and I think actors are quite good at navigating that. My biggest problem quite often was having people, friends, say, "Oh, I'd really like to do that. Can I come and do it?" And me having to say to them, "Well, we really need to use professional actors. You know, there's a reason why we use professional actors." Because with the training, I mean, most of it was practical stuff, you know, wash your hands between patients and all that sort of stuff. Don't sit on the bed, things like that. Don't put anything down on the floor if you can help it. You know, keep any chance um, of transferring any risk to the patient down to a minimum. And but what was fascinating was hearing these actors all read these stories that we were quite familiar with because we were all given the same reading book that's full of really carefully chosen stories to read to patients. So it was fascinating hearing them, you know, read these stories in their way. You know, that's always fascinating, I think, for an actor to hear somebody else do that line. but but one of the things to I suppose warn, if that's the right word, is never you know, sometimes you'll be reading the newspaper to somebody and that's fine, but sometimes someone might have a book and ask you to read it. And I remember one guy had this nautical book, and it was all about ships. I've never seen before or since some of the words I was trying to pronounce on on that day, and he was having to help me through the sentences because I had no idea what I was even trying to talk about. Um, so you always come up against, you know, sight reading's great for you, and especially as an actor, so that you know it's a very good thing to do. But every now and then you are going to come across something that you've probably never seen before. Um, and the other one was somebody had requested The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde, and I just hadn't read that for a while and forgotten how moving that story is. So ended up trying to get to the end of it without crying. So that was a bit embarrassing. But I think the main, you know, most actors have an empathy. You know, I find the really good ones have a natural empathy, and that's extremely useful in this job. And just being able to give somebody the time, and that's the other thing with the patients. They can practice speaking to you without any embarrassment in a way that they sometimes don't feel they can with their own family and loved ones. And also in front of doctors, they're very aware they're being tested, so with you, they can just, you know, feel free to express whatever they they want to, and that can be quite moving and quite a privilege. And also, I have to say, sorry, that sometimes you are reading to people who may be in a coma or have locked-in syndrome, or who are dying, and again, that's another privilege.
Eleanor, can I just pick up on something in relation to that? Actors are used to rejection. We are used to going to interviews, auditions, etc., and 9 times out of 10 they've picked the other person. Um, does that give the actor an inherent advantage when the reading service itself is rejected by somebody who says, "No, I'm not interested"?
It's also sometimes you're reading to people who have had a head injury, and sometimes their personality can be very different, and they can sometimes be quite rude, and also inappropriate.
Mm,
And we were encouraged by the speech therapist that was working, you know, that was giving us lists of people to read to and helping us to with what we were doing. Um, they would make it very clear that it was up to us to let the person know that they'd said something inappropriate, because once they're discharged, you know, they could get into an awful lot of trouble saying something. We're in hospital, we know that they've had a head injury, but somebody on the bus won't know that.
mm,
And if they say something inappropriate, they could end up in a lot of trouble.
mm,
So we were encouraged to make it clear that that wasn't appropriate, but you would carry on reading if they liked. And but yeah, sometimes you're given a flat no, And that would be when I'd try and go to a bed nearby so that that person could see exactly what was involved. Because I think sometimes the no is embarrassment. You know, they don't want to be read to. Thanks. It's a bit patronising, and I'm a grown up, and what's that about? I'm trying to recover from a stroke, and sometimes if they saw you reading to somebody else a poem or something, or a really good, our stories were really good, and um, that would encourage them to then say yes the next time.
Well, on that point, are men more likely to say no than women?
That's a good question. I think I did get a lot of no's from men, more no's than from women. Yeah, I do think for some reason women are very happy to be read to, in a way that men aren't. But again, I just sit and chat and learn a bit about them and hear their stories. And then quite often, something would come out of that, a poem or something. That there'll always be some ground that you can get to where you'll be able to provide the service. So
Final question. Is there anything that you feel that Interact is not doing that you think the charity should be doing?
gosh, I mean, I think the main thing is listening to the readers because they're the ones on the ward meeting the patients and any ideas that they come up with. And when I worked at Interact, there was a really good system for that. We could give you ideas that we were having and things, and make whatever changes were necessary, because also things are changing so fast. When I first started reading, you could sit on somebody's bed and read to them. You wouldn't dream of doing that now. I think you have an army of talented actors, and I think one of the things that came across for me was how important art is in the world. In a hospital, it's not just in a theatre. Um, this is how we all get through life, and I think that for that was the most moving thing, that whether you were singing or reciting poetry or reading a story, that difference that you're making to somebody is priceless.
Eleanor Caird, thank you for being such a brilliant guest on Right Side of the Brain.
Thank you, and it's brought some really lovely memories back. I remember at the end of our stroke clubs, we used to sing a song, and one day it was "Bring Me Sunshine." You know the Morecambe and
Oh,
Wise
yes.
song. And at the end, Christine Collins, I'll never forget, jumped out of her seat and did the skip across the room.
In the guise of Morecambe and Wise.
Yeah, she
Oh,
was.
well, that's a really lovely memory to end with, Eleanor. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was Eleanor Caird. For more information on our work, please do visit our website at www.interactstrokesupport.org. And if you're feeling generous, please do click on the big red donate button. We very much look forward to your company on the next edition of Right Side of the Brain.